Hi, welcome to this technical update for IBM Spectrum Protect version 8.1.12, IBM Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.8, and IBM Spectrum Copy Data Management version 2.2.13. My name is Trisha Jong, and I'll be going through the IBM Spectrum Protect portion of this presentation, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Sean Sperry to go through the Spectrum Protect Plus and CDM portion. These products will GA on April 23rd, 2021. The first new feature in Spectrum Protect is our retention sets for Exchange and SQL data. So retention sets are really nice because they take data that's been already backed up and convert them into a long-term archive where they will then be retained to a specific date and time. All of this is done without having to re-back up the data. All you have to do is create a retention rule that will then run at a specific time and create a retention set. So we introduced these retention sets back in version 8.1.7, and they were originally for our file system backup data and our Spectrum Protect for VE and system state backups. And in this release, what's new is the ability to do the retention sets for Exchange and SQL backups. So you'll now be able to add the Exchange and SQL clients to either new or existing retention rules. And you can tell if you have an Exchange client by looking at the client and then the platform and seeing if it says TDP MS Exchange. And likewise, you can tell for the SQL Win64 and Win32 TDP clients because they'll show up as TDP MS SQL Win32 and TDP MS SQL Win64 in the platform column. Now these retention sets, when the retention rule runs, they will be generated in place, and then you can have it set up so that they are copied out to tape. There is also the capability to generate these retention sets on demand. Now, when we talk about what data the retention sets will contain for the Exchange and SQL backups, it really depends upon what was backed up originally. And so in this chart right here, I talk about the different backup versions and then what would be included in the retention set. So the one thing to notice here is if you're only doing incrementals and differentials, then that will not be included. You've got to at least have a full backup out there or a copy backup. The other thing to note is that if you're using VSS local destination backups, those would not be included in the retention set. And this is because VSS backup data is stored on the client and only the metadata objects are sent to the Spectrum Protect server. I do have a YouTube demo out there showing how to use the retention sets for Exchange and SQL, so check that out. A couple other things to note on these Exchange and SQL retention sets is the retention sets will exclude the VSS backup like I mentioned on the previous slide. And so if your local backup is created with the backup destination equals local or both, that means that only the metadata was sent to the Spectrum Protect server, and thus the retention set will not be created for that data. If you have an incomplete backup version, where the backup failed or the backup process is still running when we create this retention set. First off, a running backup is going to be excluded from the retention set because of its incomplete state. And then the next time we do the creation of retention sets, we would include that copy of the backup as long as it finished successfully. When it comes to incremental or differential backups, if they do not have a full backup associated with them, perhaps the full backup got deleted somehow or whatever, then we would not create a retention set just for those remaining incremental or differentials. Also, during the retention set creation, if a file space has no qualified backup versions, then that file space will not be included as a member of the retention set either. If you have excluded backup objects, then those also would not be included in the retention sets. The retention set will not include them in the number of files nor in the total size count. If you did issue a query ret set contents that will also not display them. We have added a new message, ANR 4173W, and that will let you know if one or more local destination VSS backups were found when we went to create that retention set. Likewise, the ANR 4174E will tell you if a system did not find a full VSS backup associated with incremental or differential backup when we created that retention set. Okay, the next new feature has to do with restoring data from a on-premise or off-premise cloud container storage pool. First of all, when we back up to cloud container storage pools, the files are going to be broken into extents. And it's based upon these extents that we do dedupe. So if a extent is already stored in a container storage pool, we don't reback it up. Now, when we write to the cloud, we group all of these small extents into usually about 1 gigabyte chunks, which we will group together in our Cloud Accelerator cache. And then we'll push those container objects, which are the about 1 gigabyte of chunks of those extents, out as a group to the cloud container storage pool and write them out there. Previously, when we did a restore from the cloud, we would simply restore the individual extents inside of those container objects. So this would entail a lot of separate latency-bound HTTP GETs for each individual extents that we were pulling back. So now we have the ability to pull back the entire container object, which remember is about 1 gigabyte of extents that have been grouped together from the cloud, and stage them into this Cloud Accelerator cache that we used originally for backup. And then from that Cloud Accelerator cache, we will read the individual extents to do the restore. And so by pulling back that whole container object instead of the individual extents, we're able to get faster restores overall. So this Cloud Read Cache is going to be valid for all non-Swift type of cloud storage pools. So that's your IBM COS for both on-prem and off-prem for S3, as well as Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Storage. You have to have this Cloud Accelerator cache in place. And so most people who back up directly to the cloud will have to have had that. But if the way that you were getting data to the cloud was via tiering, you might not. So you might have to implement it if all you were doing was tiering to the cloud. In order to utilize this Cloud Read Cache, we have it turned off by default, which means you'll just continue to read the individual extents. If you want to turn it on, you have two options. Either on, which enables that read cache to be utilized, and we will basically prefetch and use most of the space that's out there in our Cloud Accelerator cache. We also have an on prefer ingest, and this is actually our preferred setting if you're going to turn it on. And what that does is the read cache is going to be enabled if a concurrent backup, archive, or node replication takes place to that Cloud Accelerator cache, and we find ingested restore data there. And during this backup, archive, or node replication, we start running low on space in that Cloud Accelerator cache. Then we will remove a lot of the restore data from the cache to free up and make sure that the backups or replications are successful. You can set a Cloud Read Cache max usage, and that would be the maximum amount of space that you want to allow for the restores to use in that Cloud Accelerator cache. And you can set a Cloud Read Cache retention time on how long in seconds you want to retain that data in the cache. I do have a demo of setting this up out on YouTube, so check that out. Without the cache, basically we will bring back individual extents from the cloud and use those to do the restores directly. The pros of this is that we're just bringing back the needed data, those individual extents, and so we're not wasting any of the gets that you might be charged for from a cloud provider. The con of this is that because these extents can vary in size and some of them can be small, you end up with a lot of gets causing a lot of performance overhead. And so your aggregate performance can be kind of slow. Also, it's possible during a restore that the same extent would be needed for multiple files. Once again, because remember, extents are just dedupe chunks. So we might have to do a read on that extent multiple times if you're just bringing back individual extents. If you turn on the restore cache, then the Spectrum Protect server is going to analyze what needs to be brought back. And instead of bringing back individual extents, it's going to bring back that whole object with all of the extents inside of it. And then that object will be stored with all of the extents inside of our local cache on the Spectrum Protect server. And we'll do the restores then directly from that cache, pulling out the extents that we need. This cloud read cache is going to be beneficial if you haven't networked to the object storage device with higher bandwidth, and if the network to the object storage has a higher latency. Likewise, if you need to restore greater than 10 gigabytes of data, you will also benefit from this read cache. And if you have a predominantly small file or small deduplicated extent workload. And we see these types of workloads with a backup archive client, with file server type workloads, or with Oracle database workloads. You might also want to use these cloud read cache if you want to stage that data to the accelerator cache for an extended period of time so that you could do repeated restores for the same client over numerous hours or days. Now, you don't want to use cloud read cache if you are only restoring a small amount of data, so less than 10 gigabytes. If you have a large deduplicated extent workload combined with low latency to the object storage system, so this might be single-digit millisecond round-trip latency and an average deduplicated extent size in the mid-100s of kilobytes or larger. Now, the network to the object storage device, if it has lower bandwidth, you might also not want to use the cloud read cache. On this page, slide 11, I did copy in from the documentation on different use cases and if you would or would not want to utilize the cloud read cache for those use cases. Now, some other things to consider is that cloud reclamation, where we actually go out to the cloud and we clean up those cloud objects to make sure that we've gotten rid of any deleted data. So remember, we've got these objects that have about 1 gigabyte of extents stuck in them, and we've placed those out into the cloud. And so as those extents expire off, we're going to have some dead space inside of those objects. So if you have run cloud reclamation and gotten rid of that dead space, then if you bring back an entire cloud object, you won't be bringing back dead data with it. Cloud reclamation benefits your cloud read cache operations. The consideration with cloud reclamation is that that too takes up both reads and writes on the cloud, and so you will be charged to run cloud reclamation by a third-party cloud provider. Now, it is possible that additional egress of data in excess of the total amount of restore workload will occur if you do turn on the cloud read cache. And the reason for this is, remember, we're bringing back the entire object that contains 1 gigabyte or more of those individual extents. And you might not need all of those extents for the restore you're doing. So we might be bringing back extents that you're never going to use. We're going to restore these objects that contain more extents than you're actually going to utilize. Another thing to realize is that if you restart your Spectrum Protect server, or if you turn on and off your cloud read cache parameter, the data is not going to be preserved that's out in the cloud read cache. So the data that's written to these cloud read cache is in a lifecycle mode, where we read it in from the restore. It's written out to that directories on your Spectrum Protect server, and then based upon time or needed space, that data will be deleted out of the cloud read cache so that space can be used for either additional restores or for your backups and replications that might occur. The next new feature is in our Operations Center. Previously, when you created a retention set, you could only delete off the entire retention set. And then in 8.1.11, we introduced the command line to delete off individual members, either nodes or file spaces, from an existing retention set. And in this version, we're adding that functionality to the Operations Center as well. So if you go into Clients and then More, you can do this delete from retention set capability. You can choose to either delete a node from an individual retention set or a file space. Now, if that retention set does have a hold against it, then you may not do any type of deletion from it. We will mark the data deleted, and if that retention set is out on tape, that data space would be up for expiration and reclamation. When you do issue a delete, the activity log information will be retained for the life cycle of that retention set, and this has to do with audit trail capability. If you want to see if something has been deleted from a retention set, if you do a query against that retention set, you'll notice that deleted nodes will have a asterisk to the side of them. That denotes that those had been deleted. Okay, I do have a video demo out there, so check that out on utilizing the Operations Center to delete off nodes or file spaces from an existing retention set. The next new feature in the Operations Center is a new global task page. And this global task page allows you to view, interrupt, resume, or cancel tasks for all the servers in a centralized location. And you can find this global task page in the Operations Center under Servers, Tasks. And it'll show you the information for client sessions, server jobs, and server processes. And this will show all the active and completed tasks for 15 days for all your 8.1.12 and above servers that are managed by that Operations Center. Also, if you select one of those tasks on the bottom portion of this screen, you will see all of the activity log information related to that task. If you want to interrupt a job, then you can select an eligible row and then click the Interrupt button. And this is going to apply to retention type jobs that are in a running or sleeping state. Tiering and copy type jobs are not eligible for an interrupt. And if you do select multiple jobs and choose to interrupt them, all of those jobs have to be on the same Spectrum Protect server. The Resume Job button allows you to resume retention type jobs that had been interrupted. And then we have a Cancel Process and Sessions, which works for active processes and sessions, where you can do the cancel against that. The canceling of retention type jobs requires you to navigate directly into the retention sets to drill down in that and terminate the appropriate row from there. And canceling tiering or copy type jobs requires the canceling of that related storage rule processes. If we look at slide 16, this is what the header looks like for this new global task place. And you can drill down on these successful or warning or failed tasks and get information directly. You can also see which processes are active or if you have any client sessions that are running, as well as any jobs that are running. You can use the filter to look for specific servers or specific types of jobs that you want to filter on there. We have the different actions listed on the middle bar here, and that would be the interrupt, resume, or cancel. And like I said, the interrupt is for your retention type jobs, the resume is the opposite of the interrupt, and then the cancel is for your processes or client sessions. We also have the ability to export the information on this page out to a Excel-like spreadsheet. On slide 18, I show what it looks like if you were to choose one job and then expand the bottom, and you could see all of the activity log information related to that. Okay, on slide 19, another new feature in the Operations Center is the ability to do tape library volume check-ins and check-outs. So previously, this was done via command line or script only. But now if you go into the Operations Center, Storage, Tape Device, Details, Volumes, you'll see that you have these new check-in, check-out capabilities. So here underneath the tape devices, if you choose a specific tape device, drill down into details, and then drill into the volumes area, you'll see all of the volumes you have, and you can choose to do check-ins and check-outs accordingly. Once you've issued these check-in or check-outs, you'll be able to see the results of those check-in and check-outs in the global task page that I just showed you. Okay, and I do have a YouTube demo out there on using this check-in, check-out, so check that one out. The next new piece in the Operations Center is a report on deleted retention sets. So back in 8.1.10, we added reporting for retention hold activity, retention set expiration, tape retention, and retention media status. And now in 8.1.12, we're also including deleted retention set information. And you can see that both in the specific custom reports you create or in the general operations report. On slide 21, we've made some addition to our ServerMon. Now, ServerMon was introduced back in version 8.1.7. It automatically collects debug information to help resolve issues. And this debug information is going to be tarred and zipped up and actually stored back in your Spectrum Protect server. And then if you have to work with IBM support, they can assist you in extracting that and easily getting them all of this historic information to debug what's going on your Spectrum Protect environment. So we do have some new integrated features where we have an informational data consolidation. We have some root command stanzas that our support group can ask the root user to run. We have the ability to set this always ServerMon on value to control if the threads will perform any work. We have tracing that will start the ServerMon with the -debug option. And we have some dynamic updating of servermon.ini files. We also have a couple new command line features, the -validate, -id, -outpath, -aggregate, and -keep. Slide 22, we are deprecating Swift-based cloud storage pools. When we introduced cloud storage pools, we supported both Swift and S3, but we found that most folks are not using Swift. Most folks only use S3. So starting in 8.1.12, if you do try to use a Swift-based cloud type pool, we will put up this new warning, ANR 3823W, saying that the Swift-based cloud type is being deprecated, and any data that's sent to Swift type of cloud container storage pool is still protected and can be restored. However, when you define a new cloud container storage pool, do not specify cloud type equals Swift. The next phases of this process is we will soon prevent you from creating new Swift-based pools and prevent new data from being sent to Swift-based pools. And at that point, we would only allow reading from those Swift-based pools. And then further down the road, we will give you a tool to migrate data from Swift pools over to S3 pools. Okay, on slide 23, this is just a correction to a demo that was put out there on copy containers to tape and VTL. And so specifically the command line interface demo made mention of a ability to do a copy container out to cloud. That is not supported. The only thing we support is the copy container to tape or VTL, and that has been corrected out on YouTube. On the Spectrum Protect clients, in version 8.1.12, we're introducing LZ4 client-side compression to replace LZW compression for all types of storage pools and workloads. Previously in version 7.1.5, when we introduced LZ4 server-side and client-side compression, that was only for dedupe data being sent to container storage pools. So now we're extending that to also support the other types of storage pools and workloads. So LZ4 is much superior to LZW compression. It gives you better compression rates, faster compression, and uses less CPU. Now, the only exception to this is that LZW is still going to be used for client-side deduplication objects if they're sent to the old non-container storage pools. And so this was the out-of-band dedupe that is still supported, but we don't recommend you utilize. If you want to use the LZ4 compression inside of your DSM sys or DSM opt, you can set compression equals yes. By default, it's set to no. And then in your DSM.opt, you can also do compress always, which is set by default to yes, but you can turn that to no. And that will specify whether to continue compressing an object if it grows. And so by default, we will continue to compress it even if it grows. If you don't want that to happen, you can set that to no. You can also turn on and off compression for certain types of files or certain files using the include.compression and the exclude.compression in your include-exclude files. And I do have a YouTube out there showing the utilization of this new LZ4 client-side compression. In HSM for Windows, we've added some more enhancements to our web GUI. Back in 8.1.11, we introduced this single management user interface for all the Windows HSM file servers. You do have to install this separately, so do check out the install and the demo that I created back in 8.1.11. What we added in 8.1.12 is we've added this new next scan column on the dashboard. And then if you drill down into that, you can actually schedule scans as well. We also have the ability now to download support files directly from inside of the HSM for Windows web GUI. For your Spectrum Protect for SAP or your Spectrum Protect for Oracle data protection modules, we have some dedupe performance enhancements. What we have found is that when you back up your SAP and Oracle data to a container storage pool, often the deduplication of that ends up in smaller than average extent size. So you end up with a lot of extents out there, which in the end will cause your Spectrum Protect database to grow. You'll have more extents to query during backup, more extents to delete during expiration, more extents to replicate and protect. And all of these extents, because they're small, the I/O performance is not very good on them. So now we've introduced a new minimum extent size that can be set. And this is done on a node basis. So you'll either need to register your new nodes and set this minimum extent size, or you'll need to update existing nodes and add in this minimum extent size. And this minimum extent size is going to specify the extent size to use during our data deduplication for the cloud and directory container storage pools for that specific node. You will not use this for all SAP and Oracle backups, and I'm going to show you how to determine if you want to use it. By default, our extent size is about 50 KB, but that means the extents could range from anywhere from 50 KB up to 256 KB. You could set minimum extent size to 250 KB, which would give you a range of 250 up to 1 MB. And likewise, if you set that to 750 KB, you would have a range of extent size from 750 up to 2 MB. Now, how do you know if you need to turn this on or off? Well, first of all, you'll need to turn on generate dedupe stats. And once you've actually generated some deduplication stats, you can run this query dedupe stats format equals detailed. And the first thing you're going to look at is the data deduplication being done efficiently? So you'll look at the deduplication percentage. And if that is less than 15%, then you'll want to consider setting your minimum extent size to maybe 750 KB. The next thing you want to look at is the average extent size less than 100 KB. And the way you're going to do this is you're going to take your total data protected and divide that by the sum of compressed extent count and uncompressed extent count. And if that is less than 100 KB, then you want to consider increasing your minimum extent size. Now, in this example I showed right here, our average extent size is 195 kilobytes, which does not meet our requirement. And likewise, we're coming in with a 50% deduplication percentage, which also is much bigger than the low of 15%. So we would not change our minimum extent size for this case. So slide 28 gives you when to use it, when not to change it, and what to watch out for if you do change it. So when to use if data for a given node duplicates to extent sizes well under the target average, If the chunk extent lookups are expensive due to latency from database, disk, or network. If the data that you're trying to dedupe has poor dedupe ratios, this is usually like video data, images, encrypted data, or logs. And perhaps if you can potentially sacrifice some of your dedupe efficiency for less extents being out there and faster writes and performance to the cloud or container storage pools. Also, you may want to consider using that if your data is unique to that node, meaning you're probably not getting any dedupe if you're writing out to cloud containers. Now, if you do update your minimum extent size, you want to watch out that subsequent ingest will likely not match the prior extent size, so you will see a temporary growth in your storage pool size, database usage, and replication and protect time. That will lessen as the older extents age off. Also, the growth in storage pool space is probably going to occur since larger extents in general dedupe less efficiently. So you could decrease your space efficiency in some cases by up to 65%. On slide 29, these are two examples that we saw in our lab of high latency network using client dedupe and setting the minimum extent size to different levels there. And likewise, we show a scenario of our inventory expiration of large objects and how much elapsed time occurred with the default of 50K versus 250K versus 750K. On slide 30, we do have a new best practices guide for setting up and configuring enterprise resource planning for your SAP HANA environments. I list where that document is located. And basically, this is going to give you detailed steps to build a large-size data protection solution for SAP HANA with Spectrum Protect for ERP, for SAP HANA, and your Spectrum Protect server. It's going to show using the Spectrum Scale as a shared file system to connect multiple nodes of an SAP HANA clustered environment. It'll give you a guided setup for the backup and recovery of SAP HANA from IBM Spectrum Protect. And it'll give you some different settings that will have the best performance yield. Now, some of the topics covered include installation and configuration of the Spectrum Scale, configuring Spectrum Protect server, installing and configuring the Spectrum Protect client, as well as the Spectrum Protect for ERP data protection piece. It also shows you how to configure and schedule monthly backups of the SAP HANA database so that they don't interfere with your daily backups. And it'll actually give you a script that you can download and customize in order to do that. And it shows you how to do an alternate system restore of SAP HANA. Now, those last two pieces, the monthly backups and the alternate system restore, I do have a demo of those in the YouTube that's listed there. Slide 31 is a list of the currency for these releases for both Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sean Sperry to cover Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.8.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. These are the updates for Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.8. As you can see, we have some new support for Red Hat Openshift, and also a good number of technical foundations updates, which we'll cover in this particular section of the presentation. So if you recall, beginning in version probably 10.1.6, we supported, or maybe even earlier than that, we supported protecting Kubernetes and protecting OpenShift. And the way the file systems that we supported for doing this was Ceph RBD storage, or block-based storage. Well, beginning in version 10.1.8, we are now going to support additional types of storage, including file-based storage for data protection operations. And those include Red Hat Ceph FS and also Spectrum Scale. Now, the methodology for doing these backups are going to be really exactly the same as it was for the block-based storage. We're going to use the CSI driver to create a snapshot of the PVC and store it on the storage that is being served up to the cluster. And then we optionally have the ability to take that snapshot and copy it off to Spectrum Protect Plus vSnap. So that's the way it works for PVCs. We also support protecting cluster scoped and name scoped resources using Valero. That has really not changed since the previous version of Spectrum Protect Plus. Again, same option, the ability to store it either in the Valero object-based storage or to copy it off to vSnap. Now, I just want to make you aware that at this version 10.1.8, our PVC snapshots are not going to be application aware. So they're going to be crash consistent backups of the PVC data. So that is what you're going to get when you do a snapshot of Openshift or Kubernetes storage. And there's also a small caveat on NFS-based storage that we do not protect the extended ACLs for NFS v4. We protect the POSIX attributes only. Continuing with client container support, we've eased the installation and the manual work that you have to do with the Spectrum Protect Plus BaaS client in 10.1.8. You used to have to specify the namespaces that you were going to protect in your cluster, either in the backup script or by copying over the secrets from one namespace to another when you did a backup. And beginning in version 10.1.8, we now do that for you. So you do not have to even consider that when you set up the backup as a service container support. Continuing with currency for our backup as a service client for Kubernetes and Openshift, we added additional IBM certification, and we also added Red Hat certification and entry into the Red Hat catalog. We now support Kubernetes version 1.20, Red Hat 8, Enterprise Linux 8 for Kubernetes, and also Openshift version 4.7. We used to only support 4.5 and 4.6. So we continue to add versions as Red Hat releases additional software there. I have here a screen of the backup as a service or container client requirements for Spectrum Protect Plus. I'm really not going to read all of these to you, but I just wanted to add this to this presentation just to kind of let you know that there are a good number of prerequisites or requirements for protecting containers, and they really are all quite important in terms of the versions. So my recommendation here is to, and this is true of a lot of the Spectrum Protect Plus requirements, before you do your first backup or attempt to implement this, Google the Spectrum Protect Plus All Requirements documents, and it's very well broken down into container support, database versions, etc. And look up the specific versions of things like OCP, OCS, the CSI block driver, Kubernetes, etc. to make sure that your system that you're installing from or the cluster that you're running on meet those requirements. Continuing on to the enhancements to Spectrum Protect Plus to the foundations of the core products. You recall in the last version of Spectrum Protect Plus, we introduced the ability to exclude VM decay disks from backup, And beginning in version 10.1.8, you're now able to do the same thing with Hyper-V virtual disks from SLA products. And it behaves and works very similar to the VMware VMDK disk exclusion that we introduced in previous versions. You'll just click Manage Protection Virtualized Systems Hyper-V and click on the virtual machine. And if it's already assigned to an SLA product, you'll be able to select the virtual disk to be excluded. Just a note here, this only applies to Hyper-V Server version 2019, which is Windows Build 16.299 or later. That's because the APIs that we're using take advantage of that version of Hyper-V. Catalog backup enhancement. Hopefully for those of you who are current users, you've already been protecting your catalog because you can't restore anything in Spectrum Protect Plus without the catalog. But we do strongly encourage you to do that. And we now added some prompts to the UI just to remind you that that the catalog has been protected, the catalog has not been protected, etc. So it will be very obvious if there's a problem and you do need to protect the catalog. We have introduced some options for the Oracle provider. We've introduced options to allow more granular control for Oracle logs that are visible in the Enable Log Backup selected. Basically, on this truncate logs after successful backup, you can now choose never, older than a specific number of days, older than a specified number of hours, or immediately after log backup. So it just gives you a little more control over when you truncate your Oracle logs if you're using Spectrum Protect Plus to protect Oracle. The ability also has been introduced to disable the log capability when running ad hoc backups. And basically, when the log backup option is removed from a database that already had log back enabled from the same SLA policy, an ad hoc backup job that includes this database will try to disable log backup for that database. The reason this is useful for ad hoc jobs is because there are certain circumstances, like with AAGs on SQL Server, where you're trying to clone a database, let's say, that you might want to go ahead and not take the log backup of the SQL database. So this just makes it possible to do that when you're doing things like a log backup. Job status changes. Again, this is just a convenience feature. Replication job has been updated from error to partial if the source vsnap has no new data to transfer. And again, it kind of makes sense, right? If you have no data to replicate when you're replicating a vsnap, then it's probably okay, right? You just might want to be notified, but it's not necessarily a total error because you may not have had any backups when you do the replication. And the same thing is true for copy and archive jobs. Continuing with the VMware Restore UI enhancement, the production restore disk replace option for VMware Restore workloads has been removed. Basically what this means is now, when this was introduced in 10.1.7, the feature allows you to replace an existing virtual machine's disks by those from a previous backup. But in version 10.1.8, you must explicitly select production before you get that option, whereas it used to be visible on all of these. And the reason this change was made was because obviously it doesn't apply to all of them, it only applies to production. So that's when you'll see that option. We continue to enhance our REST API documentation, and we've added a new section, getting progress information about job sessions. Here is some information just on that if you're going to program to the REST API for Spectrum Protect Plus. You can get it from the documentation as a standalone PDF or by going in the product and choosing API reference. As far as currency, we are now going to support CentOS 7 and CentOS 8 for running a physical vSnap server. So if you're installing vSnap, one of the options for installing vSnap is it comes as a package bundle that you can install on your own operating system. And because of this, we are now going to support, for those operating systems, we're going to support CentOS, these versions of CentOS, and these versions of Red Hat. What you'll find is you'll find two versions of the installation files when you download, and you'll see that they're broken up based on what version of Linux you're running. Is it version 7 or version 8? And the files will be named accordingly. We've added support for DB2 running on Red Hat Enterprise 8.0 on Linux x86 and Red Hat Linux 8.0 and SLES 15 on Linux PLE. We've changed the API that we use in the background for VMware backups. So now we're able to take advantage of the query allocated blocks functionality in VMware. And basically this is just some improved functionality in the VMDK API that lets us avoid processing some of the irrelevant sectors or blocks in certain cases. As mentioned a little bit earlier, we do support Openshift version 4.7 now for containerized server and containerized backup or backing up Openshift. We've added quite a few or changed some of the global preferences. We now allow you to set a Spectrum Protect server NAT addresses, which allows you to do a NAT address for an IBM Spectrum Protect server. We now allow you to generate an alert when time since last successful catalog backup is exceeded, and you can set that, and you saw that alert earlier in the presentation. And we've also allowed you to set a target free space error notification. So setting that allows you to specify when an error is generated based on the remaining size in gigabytes of vSnap storage. Just some changes to the global preferences. We've reintroduced the global, the backward compatibility cleanup preference, which allows you to clean both expired and unexpired snapshots that have reached their retention limit. We've updated some global preferences wording, and we've also modified the behavior of global preferences. So if the system requires a reboot when you make the change, you'll be told in the GUI. Now I do want to make a little reminder. There are a couple global preferences that are pretty obvious in Spectrum Protect Plus, but for the most part, if you're going to change any of these, like for instance this enable backward compatibility cleanup, we strongly encourage you to work with our support teams to make sure that that's the right choice for you and to understand what those settings are going to do. I just want to point out a change. You may have noticed this already, but beginning on April 1st, IBM has rebranded the IBM Knowledge Center. Basically, it's now called IBM Documentation, and what you probably have noticed is that the information is the same, but the format and the presentation is a little different. Now, if you have KC links saved, they should still work and will be redirected to the IBM documentation website. But from now on, you will be directed to this website, and here you can see the link for Spectrum Protect Plus and allows you to choose the particular version. Finally, I'd like to point out some of the enhancements for Spectrum Copy Data Management that we released with this cycle. This is version 2.2.13, and there's some currency items and additional changes, like for instance, we're now supporting the Chinese character sets. We've enhanced the support to support SAP HANA 2.0, SBS 05, vSphere 7, SQL Server 2019, and the InterSystems Cache 2018 version of that. But the main enhancement for Spectrum Protect Spectrum Copy Data Management at version 2.2.13 is the ability to protect multi-tenant SAP HANA databases in addition to single-tenant servers. So support for that particular environment. And here you can see a snapshot of a SAP HANA and the Spectrum Copy Data Management interface and the ability to perform snapshot backups and snapshot restores on that particular environment. So that's the enhancements for this particular spring of 2021 release of Spectrum Protect Plus, Spectrum Protect, and Spectrum Copy Data Management. I hope you found this information useful, and I look forward to speaking with you when we do our next release.